Welcome to Community Day at the Palo Alto Art Center, a special celebration for the community of the Art of Disability Culture exhibition. Thank you so much for joining us virtually. My name is Karen Kwan, and I'm the Development Director with the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation. I'm a Chinese American female with long black hair. We have a fun-filled schedule for you this afternoon. There will be some gaps in the programming so that you can take screen breaks and grab a drink or a snack. We will start the afternoon with some pre-recorded content, including an exhibition overview by curator Fran Osborne, an introduction to the art of Jennifer Justice, and an art activity with Mathis Lam. At 1:10, we will have a live interactive Q&A with our guest curator, Fran Osborne. We're now going to start with an introduction by our Art Center Director, Karen Kienzle.
Hello and welcome to the Palo Alto Art Center and our current exhibition, The Art of Disability Culture. We are so pleased that you are joining us here virtually for this very special event. There are numerous people to thank who have made this exhibition possible. We would first like to thank our supporters, California Humanities, Pamela and David Hornick, and Magical Bridge. We would like to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services for allowing us to host this virtual event in a hybrid fashion, also on site. And we would like to thank all of the members and donors of the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation who make all of our work possible. Thank you. I also want to thank the amazing, small but mighty team of the Palo Alto Art Center staff. We've got an incredible group of people who are passionate and dedicated, and I want to thank them. Almost everyone has had a hand in this exhibition and this related program. Thank you, Art Center staff. In particular, I would like to thank Joseph Sachs, our exhibition's lead preparator, Anna Soland, our exhibition registrar, our installation crew of Leanna, Laura, Danny, and Ivan. Thank you. I would like to thank Emer Picardo, who was instrumental in creating the website for this exhibition and also for helping to support this hybrid event. And I'd like to thank our interns, Sarah Lazarde and Jessica Berrigan, for all of their support for this exhibition. I also want to thank the artists. There are about 20 of you who've contributed your vision and shared it with our community. Thank you for being part of the show. And last but not least, I want to thank our guest curator, Fran Osborne, who has worked so dedicatedly to make this exhibition possible. Thank you, Fran. I'm delighted to introduce her next.
And now we'll get to hear an in-depth overview of the exhibition by Fran Osborne.
Welcome to the Art of Disability Culture. My name is Fran Osborne. I am the guest curator for the show, and I'm here at the wonderful Palo Alto Art Center, where people exhibit art, they make it, and they discuss it. The exhibition runs from September the 11th to December the 11th and features work by a varied group of 20 artists, all with a range of disabilities, who are either Bay Area based or who have strong connections here. The show is for everyone, however, and hopefully you will all return more than once to ponder and reflect. As the final touches were being added, I began to realize that this exhibition couldn't be better timed. The work is full of a joyful complexity that mirrors how everyone may be dealing with the current challenges. We're all trying to understand recent events, the climate crisis, the pandemic, and the future, while we also try and find moments of joy. It's not an exaggeration to say that people with disabilities face existential threats every day, and that those with long COVID are finding out how the virus will change their lives. Some of the work here was created as a response to those threats and to this ongoing sense of chaos. Maybe the exhibition will provide a way through and a safe place to rest and recharge. Everything about the show celebrates both the reality of the disability experience and disability pride, from the use of QR codes for audio descriptions recorded by the artists themselves to the invitation to walk the labyrinth, created by blind interdisciplinary artist Maya Scott. Each work asks us to rethink and reframe what we think we know about artists and art, how we engage with artworks, and how much deeper we can go if we don't rely on sight alone to engage with the work. The exhibition is also about looking, seeing, and being seen. You'll find many portraits and several self-portraits in the show that represent disability as a fact of life. Some of the works provoke us to hold the gaze of the artist, to linger and to interact. And very often, disability stories create a skewed narrative about bad attitudes and overcoming obstacles, when what is most required is an acceptance and acknowledgement that disabled people are here and want to get on with their lives without being a prop for someone else's pity or charity. In a sense, this work is a demand for more authentic inclusion and a bold statement that our society functions so much better when disabled people are included, are seen and listened to. Welcoming everyone into the Art Center is a life-size juvenile elephant and egret by local Palo Alto artist Matthaus Lam. It's 6 feet high and about 7 feet long and stands on a shiny black platform. Matthaus is autistic and has been making art here at the Art Center and with Ability Path for a long time. He was commissioned to create a piece for the entrance lobby here and decided to make an elephant sculpture using discarded materials over an inner framework. The legs are made of circles of toilet rolls stacked above each other, and they beautifully convey the character and strength of a juvenile elephant. The body is fashioned from chicken wire overlaid with the kind of pressed cardboard cup holders that coffee shops give out. The ears are made from those large pressed cardboard egg trays that are very common. And Matthaus has a signature style when it comes to eyes. You might want to look at his ceramic animals on Instagram. Here he's followed his unique style by using transparent cylindrical containers for the eyeball itself that hold golf balls painted black for the pupils. The head and trunk are made from brown crinkly packing paper, and the end of the trunk is from a black ridged extract hose. The trunk hangs down beautifully and uses the curve of the hose to suggest a friendly stance from the elephant. On the elephant's back is an egret made from aluminum foil, and Matthaus teaches workshops on how to create animals from foil as well. Moving into the introductory space to the bigger gallery, we have the title for the show in black lettering at the top of the wall. Below that are 3 portraits by Bill Bruckner of his disabled friends and colleagues, and to the right is his self-portrait, which is almost life-size at 6 feet high by 3 foot wide. The portraits on the left are wonderful, but I'm going to talk specifically about the self-portrait. We see Bill, a slim, white, balding man with grey hair and round glasses, standing in front of us and smiling. He is bare-chested and has bare feet and wears only dark blue jeans. He has a short right arm and several fingers on his left side. Bill is a painter, and when I talked to him about this series of portraits, he told me that he did many self-portraits of all kinds so that he could be comfortable with himself in the studio and the process of looking carefully at a person. Sitting for your portrait can be an intense experience, and both artist and sitter must be at ease with so much looking and staring and gazing going on. As I'm sure you're beginning to understand, looking carefully is one of the threads that runs through the show. Moving into the large gallery spaces now, we have areas on the left and right for listening and viewing. And on the left, we have Chad Allen's audio comic, Unseen. Chad created his audio comic as a response to all the chaos and political shenanigans going on in the world. You have to listen carefully because this is an audio comic created by a blind person with a blind heroine for blind and sighted audiences. And the opening comments from Chad are as follows. Greetings, reader. I am Chad Allen, author of Unseen, and I happen to be blind. This is the story of a blind assassin from Afghanistan. She is strong, confident, and she is very, very good at what she does. Underestimating her is her enemy's gravest mistake. We're living in a challenging time, and as a person with a disability, my perspective is often excluded from the conversation. I hope you see the world a little differently after reading Unseen. Enjoy. On the right, we have 2 digital portraits by a young artist, Michaela Oteri, whose beautiful series of disability pride portraits are also on her Instagram page. This is Michaela's image description. A digital portrait depicting a fat white woman with blue-purple dyed hair pulled back into a ponytail. She is wearing a crop top that reads, "The future is accessible," and a black plaid skirt. She is holding a pen in her right hand while sitting in a wheelchair and holding a pair of forearm crutches. The background is a blue-purple and Art Nouveau inspired with vining purple wisteria flowers. We also really wanted to have Michaela's portrait of disability justice activist and youth organizer Stacy Melbourne, who sadly passed away in 2020. Stacy made a huge impact everywhere and is incredibly well known for her work with Crip Camp, but also for spreading disability wisdom and joy in everything she did. Again, I'm using Michaela's image description. We have a large digital portrait, 38 inches high by 26 inches wide, depicting a mixed-race Asian American woman. She is sitting in a power wheelchair and has a trach. She is wearing a striped pink and purple shirt, glasses, jeans, and has short dark hair. Behind her is a ring of very large and vibrant flowers of different types, matching more in the upper corners. Nearby are ceramics by Don Katz, who describes himself as the blind potter. Don is an emerging artist, and I chatted recently with him and his teacher, and they described the ways that they are working together to develop his practice. They're experimenting with measuring tools and scented glazes so that Don can continue to experiment and learn. And they've also visited ceramic collections in museums and held ceramic work to understand its weight and construction. So there are many ways of learning a new skill and art, and touch is often an integral part of the learning process. Don's pieces all have a really satisfying weight and gravity, with a little whimsy thrown in. The strawberry basket is about 8 inches long and 4 inches wide and made up of woven strips of clay to form a basket. And it has a beautiful, deep turquoise blue, shiny mottled glaze. We've included a huge blow-up of Jennifer White Johnson's powerful Black Disabled Lives Matter symbol, and we've applied it directly to the wall in black vinyl. The design combines the silhouette of a raised fist, and the infinity symbol to the left represents the autism community. The symbol is about 84 inches high and 30 inches wide and has the text, "Disabled Black Lives Matter" at the bottom. Jen's design is free to download from her website and has been used in many protests since the summer of 2020, when she was inspired to create it as a response to the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. She works today to bring attention to the double whammy of discrimination that disabled people of color face, and especially the inequities that happen in the education and law enforcement systems. Jen is a powerful and joyful advocate for people with disabilities, and disability joy is enfolded into all of her work. Rachel Ungara's lush and painterly narratives reveal the very personal experiences she's had as someone with invisible disabilities. Her charcoal drawing called Disabled Strong is a work on paper which says disabled hands, strong hands. And it's also in conversation with Jen's Black Disabled Lives Matter symbol opposite. But I'll focus on one work by Rachel, which is also a sort of self-portrait too. It portrays a common experience for people with invisible disabilities because often they are not seen or believed. On a piece of repurposed denim about 22.5 inches high by 30 inches wide, we see a figure sitting on the floor of a bus with an older person using a cane looking on and a few surrounding figures, ignoring the person on the floor who has a sad expression and their head tilted and resting on their hand. Rachel's use of repurposed denim jeans references her physicality. They're her jeans, and we sense her presence, and the indignity and ignorance people with invisible disabilities often go through. We're really delighted to have work by artists from Creative Growth, Creativity Explored, NIAD, and Ability Path. These programs originated in the Bay Area and are models for how to provide an infrastructure and community for adult artists with a range of disabilities so that they can develop their studio practice and careers. There are shows currently happening in major galleries like the White Cube and Museum of Craft and Design in San Francisco, featuring artists from these programs. Often the studio artists are practicing artists as well, and so there's a rich web of collaboration and cross-fertilization that happens here because of all this creativity, support, and sharing of technique and perspectives. We have ceramic works from Creative Growth artists Lawrence Choi and Cedric Johnson. Lawrence presents us with a sumptuous feast of classic American food on a plate, a big juicy steak and a couple of burgers, one of which is standing up. Choi uses gorgeous vibrant colors and shiny glazes. Cedric's work opposite is maybe another series of abstract portraits or masks. The ceramics are heavily decorated in a kind of pointillist technique of multicolored dots and marks, and the colors merge together from a distance. Sky Kubicub's dynamic project of radical visibility is represented here by video works, which describe the process they go through with a client to create a bespoke garment specifically for them that is practical, comfortable, and durable, but which is also self-expressive and transcendent. Their clients often come together for performances, which are a model of radical inclusion too. Sky uses bright colors, graphic patterns, and oversized adornments. In the video, the client wears a garment that has been specifically designed to meet their wishes and sensitivities. They wear a figure-hugging, color-blocked all-in-one with oversized bright blue chain jewelry. Sky's videos are also full of innovation in their use of really cool captions and audio description as part of the soundtrack. We also wanted to feature work by artists from the art programs that actually references disability in some way in its content. So we're delighted to have work from two artists from NIAD, Jeremy Burleson in the bigger space and two prints by Shayna Harper out in the Nook area. Jeremy is known for featuring syringes and medical devices in his graphic work and sculptures. And actually some of the ones that we wanted to use have sold. The syringe is a particularly potent image for Jeremy, and I would think it might be for everyone now as the vaccination debate continues. The vaccination issue is a traumatic one for many people with disabilities who may not be able to get vaccinated because of a medical issue. And as the pandemic continues, their frustration and confusion about the stance that some people have taken is adding to other existential threats being felt that never really seem to make it to the center of the debate. There's also an underlying resonance with earlier histories here that were equally traumatic, like the rise of eugenics, forced sterilization of people with disabilities, and the use of medications in institutions, as well as the continuing threat of rationed care that is ever present. So a small but mighty drawing is here for us to think about the many issues that the disability community are kind of screaming into the wind about. We have 3 of Jeremy's drawings in the show, including a row of 5 syringes pointing downwards and containing a blue liquid. Next to them are really lovely line drawings of cacti and figures that are some of his signature images. On the right is work by Camille Hulvroy, who is a Creativity Explored artist, who often features joyful colors and tasty cakes, Ferris wheels and balloons in her work. And here we have a range of pieces that feature the medication she takes, and they also convey something powerful from this part of her life. I'll describe a work called Anti, which features 2 medicine bottles created with bright felt markers and pen on letter-sized white paper. On the left is a bright yellow bottle, slightly behind a bright pink bottle on the right. Each bottle has a label that refers to the effect of the medicine. for instance, to calm down. These works are small and intimate and well worth spending time with. I met Catherine Lechie Chong, a legally blind painter, on some of the highly descriptive Zoom tours organised by the Blind Posse, an informal group working with local museums to make art more accessible. Catherine has 8 paintings in the show from the White Blindness Isolation Icons series, and they're placed at this end of the gallery to create a quieter space for reflection and contemplation. I only have time to talk about one piece, but each features a particular base colour and a teacher or teachers that Catherine felt went with each colour and with whom she found comfort over the pandemic. Cobalt Blue Virgin is 3 feet square with a 2-inch outer band of solid cobalt blue. This is the first in the series, and I have to admit that it's my favourite because I like to imagine Catherine quietly finding a way through a new technique and developing an approach that would carry on throughout the series. The Virgin and Child is a common motif in art history and represents so much about unconditional love and tenderness. Catherine has added layer upon layer of white acrylic paint over the background colour so that we can just make out a mother figure holding a child. Both have halos of white, and added here and there are strips of white lace that have a triangle design that points downwards, and this too has been covered with layers of white acrylic glaze. The series seems to have been made in a devotional process, much like the approach of religious icon painters who got into a meditative state before beginning their work. Moving now to the back wall, we have black and white archive photographs by Anthony Tussler from the historic 504 protests and takeover of the federal building in San Francisco by over 100 people with disabilities in 1977. The photos reveal how diverse the protest was, and if you've seen the Patient No More exhibit developed by the Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State University, or the Oscar-nominated Crip Camp film, you'll know there's a big story of the fight for the first civil rights legislation for people with disabilities. We also have contemporary digital color photographs of the Bay Area disability art scene by Anthony, but I'm going to focus on another self-portrait now. It's another enlargement, this time from a 35mm black and white photograph, shot originally on film in the late 1970s. And it's an image of disability identity being claimed right before you. Many people are in different places as to their identity. Some of us are in denial about our impairments or our lack of hearing, or don't even think of ourselves as being disabled. Others are claiming their disability culture and identity in a loud and proud way. And this image, which is 8 feet high and 6 feet across, shows Anthony, a young white man, leaning forward towards us with his right shoulder. He wears a white mesh wife-beater top and cut-off jeans that make his leg braces clearly visible. He wants us to notice the braces and the cowboy boots with silver tips as he stares down at us, daring us to stare back. It's a provocative gaze that's almost sneering, but he wants us again to stare, and we better not look away. Another way of thinking about the work in the show is that we have pieces by older, seasoned disability artists and activists like Anthony and Bill Bruckner, but we also have a new generation of artists who are post-ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. The younger generation are less polite, less grateful, and they're occupying their space in the world because of the civil rights that previous generations had to fight for. But these are rights which can also still be taken away. So now let's consider the floor beneath us, and in the central space of the main gallery is a beautiful labyrinth created on the floor by blind interdisciplinary artist Maya Scott. It's made up of prints of one of her eyes on oval shapes, and the labyrinth itself is in the shape of an eye too. Labyrinths are not mazes. They invite you to journey into a thoughtful meditation, to take your time reaching the center and retracing your steps out again. Maya also has several colorful and playful pieces in the creative space in the lobby area that you can trace with your fingers. And she also has a tactile book out with the American Printing House with tactile labyrinth designs and a fascinating labyrinth history. Opposite, we have 3 pieces of work by Catherine Sherwood, who is a significant teacher and mentor of painting and is now retired from UC Berkeley. She's an important node in the local disability ecosystem and had a stroke at the age of 44. She reframed the way that she would work by using her left arm and began to make large pieces of work that could easily be handled, but that also referenced disability in some way and subverted art history conventions and compositions. On the left, we have a large work from the Venuses of the Yelling Clinic, and on the right, 2 healers from the Yelling Clinic. The Yelling Clinic is an artists' collective founded by Catherine and another Berkeley artist and writer, Sonora Taylor, that focuses on the intersection of disability, healing, and war. The Venus series is an ongoing project, and each one refers us back to a well-known nude created by a white male painter, essentially for what is known as the male gaze, as an object for visual pleasure. I'm going to talk about After Angra, which has some very clever subversions of the status quo. But there is also a consistent fabrication technique that Catherine uses for the Venus series, which hints at her intent. The Venuses are all painted on the linen backs of images used for teaching art history to students at UC Berkeley. The names and marks in pencil are still visible, and so on the reverse of each Venus is a patchwork quilt of Manets and Titians and Rembrandts. In After Angra, we have the back view of a reclining nude model, a person of color, who is also perhaps looking over their shoulder to hold our gaze. We are voyeurs, and the figure gazes back at us with a head made up of scans of Catherine's own brain. The relaxed figure we're looking at also has a black prosthetic right arm and hand and is holding a decorative orange and red fan with peacock feathers. The bottom half is a repeating pattern of red vertical wobbly lines on a cream background, and the upper background has been left blank, though we can still see the pencil marks of the art history teaching aids too. The painting uses a famous Angra painting called Grand Odalisque as a basis for a critique of art history. We're being nudged to consider the ways that female beauty and disability are still being judged. The original Angra painting was made in Paris in 1814, and there were jokes in the salons of the time about the extra vertebrae that Angra's model must have had to have to create such a long, languorous pose. In fact, scholars have also recently confirmed that Angra not only added extra vertebrae to her spine, but also shortened the model's right arm too. We've now magically moved to the glass gallery, which is a smaller gallery space off the main foyer. In here is an experimental installation called Future Maps by Jennifer Justice, a blind artist and assistive technology specialist, who is curious about the natural environment and the many human forces and policies that can shape it. As you enter, you can hear a sound recording of birds from where Jennifer lives in Ukiah in Northern California, as well as the sounds of vibrations made by 3D printed footprints. The wall on the right has 4 small experimental line drawings, and in the back right corner is a piece called Bucket of Rain, which I will describe. It features a rusting metal circle hanging from the ceiling, and hanging from the circle are lots of thin bead ropes which have wooden raindrops at the end. Jennifer made this piece as a reaction to a Napa fire several years ago, and the wooden raindrops were turned on her own lathe. The piece itself narrowly escaped being destroyed by a fire in 2017 when it was on display at the Enchanted Hills camp run by the Lighthouse for the Blind. Sadly, the camp itself was destroyed in that fire. To the right and on the far gallery wall of the space is a machine-made 3D map. It's displayed at a slanted angle and is a tactile topographical map of the projected river levels once the Klamath River dams have been removed. Jennifer used data from an open-source online project run by the Yurok tribe in their efforts to regenerate the Klamath waterways. The map is created by 2 laser-cut blue acrylic shapes mounted on a wooden base. On the left wall is a painting on cardboard of a carrot and stick, and to the right of that is a vitrine with more wood-turned items that create a place setting with 2 tall drinking goblets, a bottle opener and a spoon. On the small wooden plate is a bright orange 3D printed footprint of a chicken. To the left of the vitrine are bright red, blue and green 3D printed footprints of pigs, cows and a rhinoceros walking up the wall. And finally, on the small back wall to the left is a banana skin flag hanging down from a black flagpole. We're now back in the foyer next to 2 works that are also in conversation with each other, a video and a print. Later today, we're excited to have a performance by Antoine Hunter, also known as Purple Fire Crow, who is an African-American choreographer, teacher and dancer. He runs the International Deaf Dance Festival. And we really wanted to have a way for people to experience his work when he is not here. So we have a video of him of a dance called The Silence, which is 5 minutes long. It's a solo dance that incorporates ASL and dramatic movements and haunting music. Next to the monitor with Antoine's video is a work commissioned from digital artist Otis Smith by Leroy Moore on behalf of Crip Hop Nation, and it features 3 local disabled Black Panther Party members, one of whom was instrumental in having the Section 504 protests succeed because of his involvement, which brought the daily support of the local Black Panther Party, who brought hot food and other supports to keep the protest going every day for almost a month. This new artwork is from a concept by Leroy Moore and commemorates disabled Black Panthers who have been prominent in the Bay Area, posing outside the Black Panther Party office in Oakland. Clockwise from left, we have Bradley Lomax, who was in the 504 protest, Kilu Nyasha, and then Malcolm Samuels on the right. Bradley's brother, Glenn Lomax, is front right and was also a member of the Black Panther Party. There are more works in the foyer by Maya Scott that invite a sense of play and experimentation. Hanging above is one of the cubes that Maya has used for art performance pieces in the past. The hanging cube connects her work in the large gallery space to the smaller interactive works in the creative space, where you will find the Garden of Sacred Irreverence. The Garden of Sacred Irreverence is a series of 4 smaller scale labyrinths mounted on the wall and designed by Maya to be traced with a finger or a nose, or maybe with your imagination. There are 2 big, colourful, circular ones that remind me of stained glass windows, and then in the centre is a smaller labyrinth drawn in ink on a heart-shaped quarter section of a slice from a tree so that the rings are visible. Again, the labyrinth is intended as a journey into contemplation and creativity. Below is a labyrinth called Lockdown Labyrinth, made entirely from keys and also in the shape of a key. Sadly, we're coming to the end of our tour, and I want to leave you with the work in the Nook area. We have 2 prints from Naiad artist Shayna Harper with some words of wisdom about being an artist. Shayna loves to experiment with print techniques, and we're displaying 2 of her text works in the show that use letters from a variety of type styles and sizes. Her piece on the left says very simply, "Being an artist is the best feeling in the world." And on the right, her print states, "Being normal is overrated." Between the prints, we have a disability pride parade crowd of disability action figures in a vitrine. The vitrine is 3 feet wide and holds approximately 35 varied disability action figures, including Dr. X, the 3 blind mice, an African-American wheelchair Barbie, a range of figures in wheelchairs, some standing figures with leg braces and walking aids, and an action figure called Spawn leaning on his mobility aid. There's also a disabled dog that has wheels to replace its hind legs. Children seem to really love this display, and I think it speaks to the fact that disability is everywhere, and that we really are a stronger society when we practice radical inclusion. I really hope you've enjoyed finding out something of the complex joy and joyful complexity of the San Francisco Bay Area disability community.
Thank you so much, Fran. That was incredible. For those of you who have yet to visit the show, I highly encourage you to come visit the Palo Alto Art Center. The Art of Disability Culture continues through December 11th. And now we'll have a chance to hear Jennifer Justice, one of the exhibiting artists.
My name is Jennifer Justice, and I am showing new and recent work in the Glass Gallery here at the Palo Alto Art Center from September 11th through December 11th. In addition to being an artist, I'm also and happen to be an authority on audio description, ekphrasis, and aesthetic accessibility. Well, ekphrasis poetry is a creative response to a work of art. The most famous example would be Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn. I think that's one that most people are familiar with, where he's responding to an urn and the images depicted on it. And then this ekphrastic work became this something greater than the original. Like nobody really knows. We wouldn't know about the urn if it weren't for Keats writing about it. He elevated the urn to a whole new plateau, whole new plane. So that's probably the most famous example. Bare bones, the bare bones of the practice is making time for a piece of art, spending time with the work in a meaningful way, and then responding to it creatively. And it doesn't have to be lengthy. It could be 2 words, or it could be a doodle. It could be a drawing. It could be a musical, or it could be a work of fan fiction. Fan fiction is very much ekphrasis practice. I started out as a painter. I've gotten interested in sculpture and installation art and digital art. And part of that was wanting to be able to include my community or make work that's directed at my community, at the disabled community, as opposed to making a painting that maybe many of my friends couldn't see or couldn't enjoy. I still love to paint, but that was part of the necessity of including ekphrasis and ekphrastic practice in my work. I can't even say it. So I got more into sculpture, and then I became interested in the techniques that were being used to make museums exhibits accessible for blind people, like 3D printing and laser cut printing. So I have a laser cut map in the show, and some 3D prints that I made. I became interested in wood turning and carving, and just the really, sensuous surfaces that you can create with wood and sanding and oiling, and that just opens up so much more, so many more avenues of access and aesthetic richness, and I just enjoy finding these taking the road less traveled, and finding these experiences that maybe haven't gotten their due in recent decades, with the focus being on the hypervisual. I eventually became really interested in audio description as a point of access for experiencing work in my own job. I had a job at a research institute in San Francisco, the Smith Kettlewell Research Institute, and we were creating an app that it's called You Describe, and You Describe. You can take a video off of YouTube and record something to go along with it, and record it's an inline track, like it coincides with the YouTube video. So it became more like I kept in my career, they just kept intersecting. So now audio description has traditionally been thought of as just an accommodation for blind and visually impaired people. It's very practical and to the point, and functional, whereas ekphrasis is its own artistic practice. We're really lucky in the show to have had all of our artists create their own audio descriptions of their work, and to record it, and a narration of them reading their description. So that's really unique. I haven't come across any other shows that do that. And I would encourage people who are online to seek out those descriptions. I think it's a really nice resource to have with the show. And it's great for people that are, not only for blind and visually impaired artists, or blind and visually impaired audience members and artists, but also for people that can't make it to the show because of the pandemic or for whatever reason. It's just another avenue, another channel into the work for people that can't be on site right now. I try to demystify the process by telling people to start from the knowledge that nobody owns your way of experiencing a work of art. Nobody does your way of being in the world like you. So you should applaud yourself for that. It's my hope that everyone can approach a work of art from a place of co-ownership and a spirit of collaboration. Previously, artists with disabilities and art lovers, we've had to create our own art hacks to be able to access spaces and venues that just weren't made for us. At some point in my artistic practice, in my studies as a painter, I realized I wanted to make work that was accessible for my community, that my community could really experience in full. And that's sort of driven my work ever since, and how I think about the work as I'm making it. And now I'm starting to paint again and draw again. So it's been a fun journey to try to really think about art in terms of, all of its properties instead of just the visual. I think it's going to be on view in my room here. We're going to have projected this ekphrasis guide that I wrote for a friend of mine, another blind artist who is based in Australia. She asked me to write a score, an ekphrastic score for her exhibit that was opening this summer, as just a general guide for audience members for participating in that kind of a practice. And so I think we're going to have that screening in the gallery here. So that was really the most broadly stated kind of meta version of writing one, because it was like writing an ekphrastic poem about ekphrasis. So it was fun. It was fun, and I really like what I ended up writing.
And now we'd like to introduce exhibiting artist Mathis Lam, who created everyone's favorite elephant in the room, the amazing elephant sculpture in our lobby. Mathis will be demonstrating the aluminum foil art activity he is doing live at the Community Day event at the Art Center. Here are two examples of Mathis creations. Absolutely beautiful rabbit and a duck, and their anatomy is just incredible. And they're made with one piece of aluminum foil, and they stain perfectly on a surface. And now let's go to Mathis.
All right, let me see. My name is Mathis Lam. My medium is making sculptures out of paper, clay, foil, and recycled materials. And my exhibit is called Elephant with Birds. Basically, the main thing you need is foil. Aluminum foil would work, but yeah. Mainly it involves twisting the foil into the right shape and tearing out some places if necessary. First, you twist the middle over here for the body. Let's see. Alright, then you tear over this area for the back end so far. And these two ends over here are going to be the legs. And this part's going to be the tail. Alright, and this is going to be the front half, so you kind of do the same thing you did over on the other side, only the edges are going to be smaller for the front legs. And this is going to be the head, so you twist here for the neck. The edges of these parts are going to be the ears. And this part's going to be the rest of the face. And there. Let's see, a long time ago, I was managing to build a small giraffe out of some recycled materials, such as toilet paper rolls and a tissue box. The only problem was that it never got finished. So eventually, about a short while ago, I decided to build something from all the materials that I collected over the years in the hope of rebuilding something like that. That eventually accumulated into the large elephant. So it mainly consisted of all sorts of paper materials, such as paper rolls and paper cup holders and packing materials and egg cartons and all that kind of stuff. So it all managed to get to be secured onto a wireframe and then put onto a base.
About how long would you say it took to make that elephant?
3 months. I think I actually managed to do some art things on display here several times ago. Although I think this is one of the biggest ones.
How does it make you feel to get kind of this sort of recognition?
It actually feels pretty good.
That's incredible. We love having Mathis's Elephant right here welcoming our guests. And we're now, let's see if we're ready for Fran. We have Fran Osborne with us and answering some of your questions. So in the meantime, let me go get Fran. And if you have any questions about the show, about the artist, please put them in the chat. And we'll be right back.
So we don't have any questions from attendees yet, but anyone who would like to submit a question in the chat or the Q&A, please do. This is your chance to hear directly from Fran. Anything you want to know about the exhibition. So in the meantime, I can ask you a couple questions, Fran, to get you started.
Sure.
Just to introduce myself, I'm mainly off screen, but my name is Emer. I help out with the virtual programs here at the Art Center, and I'm going to do some questions with Fran, and then if anyone has any questions, we can ask. And oh, we have a question. So we'll start with a question from the participants. So Robin Earth would like to know, how did you find the artist?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you so much, Robin. Well, there are always a few people that you know. And so when an opportunity comes up, you try and have some anchor artists in the show that you know, and then you carry on looking. So I'm always looking at art, and I'm always looking for people who might be suitable for a show. I'm a sucker for art, just like anybody else, and I go to as many exhibitions as I can, and do a daily trawl to see what's out there, or people will send me things and make suggestions. But for this show, it was principally Bay Area artists that we were looking for. So it was really important that if they, that they either lived here or worked here or had a really strong connection here. So it was geographically kind of limited. We do have a few artists who are outside of the Bay Area, but they have very strong links here. Or, sorry, my mask keeps slipping. Or they have made work that references people who live here, or references activists who live here. So we have work by an artist called Michaela Oteri, and she has made a lot of portraits of some of the local disability justice activists, including Stacy Melbourne. So it was really important to show the kind of close-knit ties that there are here, and the way that the networks work, and how that is a really important part of the disability community, that people support each other and they know about each other's work and they show up to each other's events. But we also wanted to try and have work that would speak to each other in a way. So I was very keen to have work by Catherine Sherwood in the show, because her work speaks to people who are really interested in art history. So we have one of her Venuses in the show. And you can kind of communicate so much with that one piece of work, with the grand odalisque that we have in the show. And then we just kind of keep looking, to see what's going to fit, and everything has to sort of fit in the space as well. So that's a consideration. I mean, there are lots of other really cool artists out there whose work I would love to include, but this was a very particular kind of show. So I hope that answers your question. I also worked on a disability history project about 5 or 6 years ago, and got to know a lot of people in the disability community really well. So you know, once you start to realize how much work there is out there, and the other relationships that people have, you just start to sort of find the work wherever you look. So and really everything had to reference disability in some way. So I know there are artists who have a disability who may not reference disability in any way in their work. So they may be a portrait painter, or they may be a video maker, but they don't really focus on disability as part of their work. And so the artists that we also have from Creative Growth and Creativity Explored and NIAD, we chose pieces that reference disability because it was very important that it was kind of disability dense, if I can use that phrase. So it's always hard though, because there are always things you have to leave out. And you hope that there'll be another show in future so that you can use people's work that you really like, but it might not quite fit with the concept of the show. I hope that communicates.
Great. Yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions for Fran right now? So Brittany is saying she doesn't have any questions, but thank you for explaining. Do you want to say a little bit more about like the themes or the groupings of artworks within the show, and yeah, how that kind of came together for you?
Yeah. Well, originally, this show was just intended to be a very small part of a much bigger show that was created by the Cooper Hewitt Museum, which was really a design show. It was a show focused on design and accessibility. That it has some issues because it's not actually that accessible for people with visual impairments. It's a traveling show. But the pandemic kind of put the kibosh on that. And so the actual show that we have here today was really a much smaller show that, you know, has expanded to fill the whole gallery and all the spaces in the gallery. And there are quite a few themes in it. I think one of the themes that's pretty obvious maybe when you look at all the work is that of looking and seeing, and whether you need sight to see something, but also what it's like to be stared at, and then what it's like to be seen. So there are different ways of diving into all of those questions. A lot of the artists really wanted people to slow down in the galleries and really take a lot of time to actually look at everything really carefully. You know, it's notoriously short amount of time that people actually spend in the gallery looking at stuff, you know, I don't know, 25 seconds if you're really lucky, when an artist may have spent months and months and months making a work. So we're kind of encouraging people to really slow down and look. But then artists like Chad Allen, who is the blind writer who wrote the audio comic, you know, he does question whether you need sight to really see. And so I think that it's a kind of playful exploration of some of those themes. Catherine Sherwood's work explores a lot of those art historical ideas of the male gaze or the gaze, and who's considered beautiful or acceptable. So that's definitely one theme. I think another one that I've become a bit more aware of as the show has gone on is the difference between the younger generation and the older generation. So the younger generation who were born post ADA and now, you know, are less polite about taking up their space in society and less kind of grateful. Whereas the older generation who had to really fight for their civil rights, you know, they have a slightly different stance and a slightly different perspective. So it's very interesting to see the difference between the young artists and the older artists. And I think the other sort of main kind of undercurrent in a way is how we're all responding to these very challenging times that we're in, and the sort of sense of dislocation and isolation and confusion that people are feeling that just never seems to quite go away. Some of the work was made as a response to that kind of situation. So it is a show for everybody. You don't have to be disabled to come and see the work and enjoy it and find it really interesting. And you know, I think we still have so much that we can learn from the disability community, especially through the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. We have a couple more questions coming up now. How can I find more work by the artists featured? Is coming from Lucien.
Ooh, very good question. We have a website page for the exhibition on the Palo Alto Art Center website. Maybe somebody could put that in the chat for everybody. And I think on those, and then each artist has their own page. And I think from there, you can then find their own social media and websites. I would say pretty much all of the artists have their own website and social media presence. So I really encourage you to actually explore their work, because we can only show a very small part of their body of work in the exhibition. So please do look them all up. Some are more active on social media, some are more active on their website, but that would be really great. And some of them have newsletters that you can sign up for. So please explore their work.
Cool, yeah. And then from Elizabeth Steen, we have, it kind of relates a little to your previous question about the themes. She said, there are so many different types of pieces in this show. Did it take a long time to decide how to arrange everything, or did it come quite naturally?
Oh, great question. Great question. Thank you. Well, I actually made a model of the gallery spaces to work out where to put everything. So it is kind of it is quite a nerve-wracking part of the process. And you kind of know that it's going to fit, but a lot of the time in the early part of developing an exhibition, you never quite know how it's going to fit together. But making a model is a really good way of understanding how the space is going to work. And actually in the model, I had quite a large blow up of Anthony Tussler's black and white photography self-portrait. And I did kind of, wonder whether we should have it really large in the show as a focal point when you come through the galleries. And the staff here sort of said, should we do a blow up? And I was so pleased that actually happened, because it really is a stunning portrait that you see from quite a long distance when you come into the gallery. And it's Anthony as a young man kind of claiming his sort of bad boy disability identity. So it strikes you as soon as you come in. And it's so unapologetic that I think it communicates very clearly when you come in. And then the other artists, it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle in a way, or a bit like one of those kind of logic puzzles. You just keep experimenting until it just starts to work and pieces start to have a conversation with other pieces. So we have Rachel Ungara's drawing called Disabled Strong on one wall. And then on the sort of diagonally opposite, we have Jennifer White Johnson's Black Disabled Lives Matter symbols. So they're kind of sort of echoing each other. And you're hoping and trying to get moments like that in the show so that nobody stumbles over anything and there aren't any weird transitions, and that things start to sing and kind of become more powerful because of where they are in the show and what they're next to. So it's a case of just experimenting and moving things around. And sometimes there are really serious limitations on what you can do and what you can't do. So usually it's an iterative process. You just keep working away at it. But thank you. That's a really great question.
I can ask you a couple more questions.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So Yeah, I was interested, can you describe in more detail the concept of radical inclusion and why it's important?
Oh, yes. Great question. Well, I have been working in the sort of museum world for quite a long time now, and often you hear people say, you know, we want to be more inclusive, and they'll mention a list of minority groups, but often, although this is beginning to change, so often they'll miss out the disability community altogether. It just does not even occur to them. So they'll say, you know, people of different sexuality or fluid gender and racial equity, and then disability somehow just gets missed off the list. So the idea of radical inclusion is to really always make sure that you include people with disabilities in whatever work it is that you're doing. And it requires that you make I mean, it's not always straightforward. It's not always easy. It might cost more money. It might take more time. But the whole point of it is that you end up with a much, much better result at the end, where you have included everybody. And although it may have been challenging and unfamiliar territory for you as an organization or as a person or a project leader, your result is going to be so much better. And the experience of the people themselves is always also going to be so much better. And it's a kind of practice, like a professional practice that you can develop. And it's fine not to know as well, and to be willing to make mistakes is part of the deal, you know, willing to be uncomfortable and to get it wrong is definitely part of it. And I've made lots of mistakes too, in my experience, sort of just getting it wrong or making all kinds of assumptions about how things are and then finding out that I've got it completely wrong. So I think it's becoming more and more part of the arts landscape. And I think you also begin to realize just how excluded some people are from the arts sector, that you may not have just sort of realized how excluded people feel or how isolated they feel. And in terms of opportunities for artists, artists with disabilities face lots of challenges, and there may be some amount of grant funding for them, but it's often done in a kind of token way, like a small amount of money for you to, you know, get your photographs framed. But it's not necessarily a huge amount of money to do a show. So it's a very, it feels like a very uneven landscape in that way. And so I always try and do anything I can to support artists with disabilities to get more, well, first of all, to get their work seen by a lot more people and to be in more shows, because the more you build that up, the more well-known you become and the less of a kind of taboo there is about it all. But then also things like, you know, Zoom meetings, which until, you know, the pandemic began, a lot of people would be asking to have that facility. But everybody would always say, oh, it's too expensive, nobody wants that. So there are all kinds of elements of that practice of radical inclusion that slowly but surely are kind of adding up to being able to include more people with disabilities in a more regular way, so that it doesn't have to be this special kind of accommodation, and it's just happening as a matter of course. So for instance, today we had 2 blind visitors who want to use the Braille guide, and they came specifically because that's available in the show. And then why isn't that happening in every exhibition? You know, why isn't audio description happening in every exhibition? Well, it's because it's not standard best practice. And yet it could be, and I'm hoping that going forward it will be. So sort of things like that. I hope that communicates. I mean, it is quite radical because often you have to go against the tide and be quite a strong advocate for things. But also the law is on your side too. So the ADA states that people are entitled to have an equivalent access, an equivalent experience. So even if you can't provide the same experience, you need to be able to provide an equivalent experience. So I don't know, I think we're at the very early days of all of that, and that things are still developing and expanding, and there's a lot more mileage in all of this, and a lot more creativity to come as well. Because in the past, the ADA is always seen as this compliance issue. So, you do it because you have to. So, you have to be wheelchair accessible. But wouldn't it be great if it was seen as a creative opportunity to be accessible, and then unleash, a lot of artists and creative thinkers in that way. So rather than fixing a problem, which is how a lot of disabled people often feel in situations, like they feel like they're a problem, how can you approach things in a creative way?
I think that, gives people a lot to think about. And, I think that, like you say, like if this is something that can be like built into like processes from the very start as a kind of natural approach, then that's something that we can, aim for.
Yeah, and I think I mean, the best example I can think of it is from the 504 sit-in, the protest that happened in San Francisco in 1977, when a really strong coalition of different disabilities were there, represented by people with lots of different disabilities. And they developed this protocol for their regular meetings that meant that they would only gather as long as an interpreter was there. And as soon as an interpreter was not there, they stopped the meeting, because if you continue, you're excluding the people who need the interpretation. And they would go as long as it took for everybody to speak, even if that person had some kind of disability that meant it took them a long time to say something. So they had practices like that were just sort of standard. So, it does require really letting go of the normal way of doing things, I think, but it definitely results in a stronger outcome. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think, some of the artists in the exhibition, for example, Catherine Lechie Chong created work during the pandemic and related to the experience of living through a pandemic. How do you think the pandemic has affected the artists in this show and the disability community in general?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I can only sort of speak anecdotally from the people I've talked to. So yes, Catherine kind of went into overdrive and produced a lot of work, and is still producing an awful lot of work. So definitely check out her website, because it's very interesting how she has photographed her work, because a lot of it, I think, was created in really low light, so like in candlelight, and she has some really interesting photographs of how she sees her work, when it's in this very dim light. And then others, I think, have found it really difficult and haven't produced very much at all. There's this whole existential threat going on the whole time of rationed care, and also people who could get vaccinated not getting vaccinated and endangering other people. So I know people who haven't been out of their apartment more than once or twice this whole time because they don't feel safe. There's all kinds of issues with power and access to things. So I think it's just, for a lot of people, it's compounded some of the problems and challenges that they were facing. And then for others, they've just, I don't know, they've just kind of knuckled down and made a ton of work. So it's hard to make a generalization, I think. And I think people are also worried that, things like, remote working might disappear when it's such a huge benefit to people with disabilities, and there's so much discrimination in the workplace, and people have been calling for that for a long time. So I don't know, it's hard to say. I think there's a feeling that it's not going to get any easier, you know. It's not. It's going to continue being really tough.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. We actually have a comment from Bill Bruckner, who is one of the exhibiting artists in the show. So thank you, Bill, and I'll read out what he says. He says, "This is less of a question than a comment. One major challenge when having shows of artists with disabilities is not to make the artist or their work remarkable or exceptional or inspirational. I feel that this show that Fran curated was able to create an exhibit that is successful in not falling into this trap." Do you have anything you'd like to say in response to Bill's comment?
Yes, thank you so much, Bill. That's so nice of you. Yeah, because there's that whole inspiration porn trope that you can disappear down. And unfortunately, even if you, with your best efforts, you know, people can still misinterpret what you're trying to do. And so journalists will still use all kinds of, you know, overcoming narratives about things, even if you never say that and you never mention it and you never put it in any of the text around it. And it's really hard to fight against that. And it just shows, you know, the lack of awareness that there often is. But it's a you know, it's a complicated topic too, because what you're trying to avoid at all costs is the idea of feeling sorry for people or any kind of pity or charity model that might be there. And the disability studies uses different models of disability. So there's the medical model, which is where people are seen just as a diagnosis, just as a kind of description of what sort of disability they have. And they're also seen as somebody that might need fixing, for instance, or curing or changing in some way. And then the more recent model is the social model, where the disability is created by the environment that somebody's in rather than by them themselves. So for instance, if you don't have your glasses and you need to read small print in the supermarket, then you're disabled by that situation. But I think there's also a more recent model, which is all about, and I've seen it described in various different ways, but it's a more radical model of the person with a disability being the generator of something rather than the recipient of something. So I think it's still a developing field, but yeah, it's a kind of, and especially in the Bay Area, because there is this rich history of activism and networking and kind of radical groups that were set up, that I think, you know, we don't want to lose connection with that history and all the powerful systems that were set up. So a lot of people who were in the 504 protest went on to be activists. And also a lot of the artists in the show became quite activists because of their experience as a person with a disability, especially if they developed a disability later on in life. So it's, you know, it's not something, I mean, disability is a part of life, so it's not something to be shied away from. But we're definitely avoiding the inspiration porn model of disability. So thank you, Bill. So I have a question for the people online, which is, you know, do you think that we need a kind of a disability culture center somewhere on the West Coast? And I'd be interested to know what people's kind of thoughts about that are, so that it's not just this kind of one-off exhibition that happens every 5 years. And the other thing is that the artists in the show are really interested in producing a catalog. So we're looking for funders for that. So if anybody has any leads on that or any suggestions, that would be really useful too.
April is saying, I want to say thank you for giving us this great blessed opportunity to see all amazing artworks and photography, including handmade crafts made beautifully by every wonderful artist. And then we have another comment from Susan Wright, I think. She said, that would be great. I think she's referring to the Disability Culture Center, especially if it could also have some spaces that could be used to be creative. And Elizabeth Stein says, I think the idea of a center is a great idea. I would put it not in the West Coast, since there are a lot of more resources already available on the West Coast. So yeah, if you've any points you'd like to add from those comments.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the idea of a big creative center that was accessible for people would be amazing, where if they could go and make art, and it had lots of accessible bathrooms, and it was on one level and no stairs and no need to go to an upper level because it was all beautifully designed. I think that would be amazing. And maybe not on the West Coast. That's an interesting idea. Yeah. Yeah, because we really are very lucky where we are, that there are so many organizations and facilities. There are lots of organizations based here, like the Disability Visibility Project run by Alice Wong, and Diversability run by Tiffany Yu. There are a lot of really active groups online and that reach a lot of people. But I think if you live in the middle of, a state that doesn't have many facilities, it's really, really hard and really, really challenging, and it's even more isolating. So I mean, it's I can just see so much potential in everything, and so much community being created by all these suggestions, and you just don't know where the ball will start rolling, but there's such a huge need for people to connect and spend time together, and making art together is one of the best ways of not feeling isolated and connecting. But it's hard to get the money, and it's hard to get people interested, and I mean, maybe I shouldn't say that because that makes it seem impossible, but yeah. I can see, is there another comment from?
Yeah, we have a comment from Jennifer White Johnson, who's also an exhibiting artist in the show. So I'm glad that you could join us today. And she said it can start there and then expand out, since the disability movement started there in the West Coast, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. And also maybe Chicago too is another good place, because there's a lot of activity in Chicago too. Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's really great to see you online. And people are really loving your work in the gallery. So I just wanted to pass that on to you. So, and it's interesting too that I had led a group this morning of young leadership sort of people. I think there were 15 of them. And although they wouldn't say necessarily in the main group that they had some connection with disability, when the main presentation broke up, a few of them came to talk to me individually, and they were really interested in what was going on and found it all really kind of powerful. So I suppose the more conversations we can have about it, and the more open we can be about the situation, and move everything away from this sort of idea of just providing services for people, but that actually there's this really interesting cultural stuff going on that everybody can enjoy and benefit from. I think it starts to move the needle, but there's still so much work to do.
I'm wondering if we have any more questions coming in. It doesn't look like it. Yeah, I think just kind of going from what you've kind of been talking about generally, yeah, what do you hope visitors to the exhibition will get from the show and come away with after they visit?
Well, I really hope that it does shift their perspective somehow, and that going forward they'll notice disability more in their everyday life, and maybe it will shift how they respond to it. There's often a lot of othering that happens, where we project our own kind of bias onto people about what they can do and what our expectations of them are. So even if it has a small difference in that way, that maybe people understand the disability experience a bit more and they're less judgmental and more compassionate, that would be a really great outcome. But I also hope that people come back again and spend time with the work and maybe come and visit on their own when they're not in a group. So on a day like today, which is community day, and there are lots of groups milling around, it's hard sometimes to experience the work. I mean, I know that the artists have spent a long time making their work. So when somebody just spends 10 seconds looking at something, it's always really sort of disappointing. So maybe, to sort of check out the work a lot more online and look at the artists' websites and sign up for their newsletters and follow them on their social media and stuff. And just kind of keep an eye on what they're up to, because a lot of them are doing all kinds of other really interesting projects too that they haven't necessarily talked about in the show, or they're working for another disability organization doing something, or they're going to be speaking, or they've got a chapter in a book coming out. So there's actually an awful lot going on as well outside of this exhibition. So maybe it'll be a springboard for people knowing about some of the artists more. And then maybe if they have any leverage in their organization to make things more accessible and to, check that their website is accessible, or they're going to organize an event and they want some deaf people to come, that they'll have an interpreter. So any small measure like that to increase the accessibility of what they do is a really welcome outcome too.
I've definitely noticed people have been really enjoying the show when they come to see it, and spending a lot of time enjoying the works. And you often see people walking the labyrinth in the main gallery, Maya Scott's labyrinth. So yeah, we've got a lot of positive feedback already about the exhibition, which is great.
Yeah, somebody told me that they had visited, I may already have said this because I think I've said this already about 3 or 4 times today, but they visited and they wanted to walk the labyrinth, but they decided to lie down on the labyrinth and explore it on the floor. So there's really no set way of engaging with some of the work in the show. I haven't had a chance to walk the labyrinth myself yet, actually, so I must come back and do that because it's a whole personal journey. I mean, I think people are staying a long time when they come, which is very reassuring, and I like that. And it's up for quite a long time too. So we have until December the 11th that you can come and see the work in person and experience it. So that's a really great time frame, actually.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And one question, which is just maybe one to kind of I was personally curious about. So Matthaus Lam's Elephant Whispered is very, very popular here. Everyone loves it. I'm curious now what will happen to it after the exhibition, because even just from watching the video of him creating it in the house and bringing it and setting it up, I was just, do you know what will become of it at the end of the show?
Oh gosh, I don't actually. I really don't. I've just had so much fun watching that elephant develop over time, and we would have meetings every so often, like progress meetings, to find out how it was coming along. And you would see all this huge elephant behind Mathis sort of emerging. They made it on a wheelable platform, so it can be wheeled to another location, and it does come apart, so it can be transported somewhere else. And you know, maybe it could have a home for a bit more time somewhere in a public place, which would be absolutely wonderful. So if anybody wants to host it somewhere, I think that Matters would be very up for that. I don't know, honestly, what, maybe they'll store it somewhere and, you know, it can be used again, but it's just so good a piece. We don't want it to sort of disappear and get dismantled. I think they were collecting those materials for a long time to make it.
Does anyone have any other questions they would like to add or ask Fran before we finish up here? We don't have anything more coming in. Don't think so. Is there anything you would like to add to our virtual guests before we finish up?
Well, people can always reach out and contact me via the Palo Alto Art Center if they have work that they think is interesting that I should know about. You know, please feel free to do that and reach out and contact me. I'm always very interested in what people are up to. And if their work is a good fit for a future show, I will definitely think about it. Or, you know, if they have a colleague or a friend who's an artist, or any events coming up that are related to disability, I'm always very interested to hear about that too. There is the Superfast Disability Film Festival is coming up. I think it's next weekend. That's run by the Longmore Institute on Disability, and it's all happening online. So please check that out. That's a really interesting model because it's run for disabled people by disabled people. So it's incredibly accessible. They have a really great range of films from all over the world. It's definitely an international event. I think it's the longest running disability film festival in the States. And everything is done, I mean, it's all created by people with disabilities. So every facet of the community is represented. And it's really good. It's really good value for what it costs. So I would urge you to check that out if you don't know about it.
That sounds great. Yeah, I think we have some comments in the chat. Susan Wright saying just huge thanks to you for organizing and to the artists for sharing their work. And from Elizabeth Stein saying thank you for the show and thank you so much for your time today. So I want to echo that. Thank you so much, Fran, for coming to do this Q&A. It's super interesting and we really appreciated it. So yeah, thank you once again.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the program. I've kind of lost track of what's happening next, but I better go and check out what's happening. Sure. Thanks so much, Ema. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the comments and questions to everybody, and hope to meet you again at some point in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the Q&A with Fran. So insightful, such a powerful exhibition. Lots to think about, and you know, lots for organizations and all of us to do more. I love what Fran said. You know, be kind, be understanding, be more compassionate and less judgmental. And I think we can all work towards that. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this virtual portion of our community day. And again, another plug to come see the exhibition if you haven't yet already. If you've seen it, do come back as well and bring friends. And for that, we conclude today's program. Goodbye.